There are encounters that last only a moment, yet have the power to redirect an entire life. Not through miracles, nor through lofty speeches, but with a single look free of judgment. A single phrase that reaches the deepest, quietest place within. Such encounters have happened, not only changing the fates of those involved, but echoing across more than 2,000 years. At the center of these meetings was one man, not a king, not a warrior, not a conqueror wielding power, but someone who walked silently through the world with a heart full of boundless compassion. The Buddha, not one who founded a religion to be worshipped, but one who simply pointed the way for others to return to their truest selves. What's remarkable is that those who encountered him weren't sages or saints. They were ordinary people, and often deeply broken. A ruthless killer, a courtesan living beneath the weight of social scorn, a grieving mother driven mad by loss, an untouchable scorned by society. A powerful king who discovered he could possess everything and still lose himself. And yet, with just a single moment before the Buddha, not through supernatural displays or rigid dogma, but through his sheer presence, something inside them began to soften, to shift. They weren't forced to change. They chose to, because something long dormant within them had been awakened. No one asked them to renounce the world, but they found they could no longer return to who they once were. And what draws us to these stories isn't their sacredness or mystique, but their humanity. Because somewhere in each of these strangers, you might find yourself. In moments of rage, when you want to tear everything down. In the depths of despair, when grief makes the world unbearable. In the hunger to be seen, to be understood. In those quiet, aching times when you realize you've wandered too far from yourself and don't know the way back. The Buddha's encounters weren't just events of the past. They are maps of the mind, waiting to be read by those living now. And if you listen closely, you might realize, you too, have met the Buddha, not in his form, but in those unexpected moments when your life quietly called you to awaken. The Buddha and the encounters that changed the world. There's a question that has quietly echoed through the consciousness of humanity for over 2,000 years. How did one man, who never wielded a weapon, who never ruled with power, who spread no fear and sought no conversion, change the course of an entire civilization? Without conquering, without promising miracles or heavenly rewards, through nothing more than his presence and compassion, he transformed lives. And from those transformations, a new current of thought, a new way of seeing suffering and freedom was born. The secret did not lie in what he preached, but in how he met people. The Buddha's life, if you look closely, was not a rigid journey of doctrine. It was a flowing stream of profound encounters. Moments where two human beings, seemingly strangers, truly saw one another for the first time. He did not come to impose a fixed truth. He walked, silently, barefoot, into the lives of others to meet them exactly where they were. And in these meetings, transformation began. Those the Buddha encountered were not saints or sages. They were living embodiments of every shadow and light within the human psyche, from murderers to courtesans, from kings to outcasts, from mad mothers to zealous seekers. They did not come to him convinced by his sermons, but drawn by something deeper, a gaze free of judgment, a silence that listened without condemnation, a presence that gently touched the purest part of their being, long buried under layers of pain and conditioning. Each encounter did not just save a single person. It became a living symbol of states of mind we still wrestle with today. Angulimala was not merely a murderer of the past, but a mirror for all who've lost themselves in rage, who are prisoners of their past. Amrapali was not just a renowned courtesan, but the echo of every soul longing to be seen beyond society's labels. King Bimbisara was not just a ruler of ancient lands, but every one of us, restless even with everything in our hands, unsure of who we truly are. This is why the Buddha's life has never faded into the myths of history. Because each encounter he had is a spiritual mirror, reflecting our own inner journey. We are not merely listening to ancient tales. We are seeing ourselves in every gesture, in every word. These meetings did not only change them, they have the power to change us, too, if we're quiet enough to hear. Perhaps the most profound truth of the Buddha's path is that he never tried to change anyone. He simply met them, fully, compassionately, without separation. And from that space of genuine encounter, People began to see themselves clearly, honestly, and found their own way to transform. There was no coercion, no threats, no promise of paradise. Only a space of presence, where they could simply be, and in that being, become. Part 1. Boundless Compassion. Encounters between light and darkness. Light never needs to shout to prove its existence. It simply appears, and darkness retreats on its own. The Buddha did not seek out the perfect. He walked gently into the world like a quiet stream, touching the places others were too afraid to go, the lives of those labeled lost, impure, or beyond redemption. Yet he never asked them, "Who were you in the past?" He simply stood before them, fully present, and invited them to see themselves anew. In this part, we follow his footsteps into the hearts of those who seemed to carry no light at all. A murderer who bore the weight of 100 lives on his hands, a woman scorned by society for her profession, a slave rejected by the entire world. And yet, it was within these very people that the Buddha's compassion shone brightest, not because they were worthy, but because true compassion needs no conditions. Story 1. Angulimala, the murderer who wore a necklace of human fingers. I have stopped, but you have not. Deep within the desolate forest outside the kingdom of Kosala, there was a name that evoked sheer terror. Just the mention of it was enough to make villagers bolt their doors and pray for safety. Angulimala, a notorious murderer, he wore around his neck a grisly necklace made from the severed fingers of his victims. He didn't kill for money, nor out of vengeance. He killed to fulfill a cursed number, 100 lives. His actions transcended ordinary evil. He became a symbol of unredeemable darkness. But what many never knew was that Angulimala was not born a monster. His real name was Ahimsaka, which ironically means harmless. He was born into a respected Brahmin family and was once a brilliant student under one of the most esteemed teachers of the time. Kind, bright, and respectful, Ahimsaka had a promising future. But jealousy among fellow students and the blind trust of his teacher planted the seeds of a tragic downfall. Falsely accused and isolated, Ahimsaka was driven to the edge of madness and hate. That was when he became Angulimala, the finger-wearing killer. Then one morning, while seeking his final victim to complete the fateful count, he saw a calm figure walking slowly into the forest. No weapons, no fear. It was the Buddha. Enraged and wild, Angulimala drew his blade and charged. But strangely, no matter how fast he ran, he could not catch up. The figure simply walked, yet always remained ahead. Exhausted, Angulimala shouted, "Monk, stop!" The Buddha turned and replied with serene clarity, "I have stopped. It is you who have not." Those words sliced deeper than any sword. Angulimala staggered, confused. The Buddha explained gently, "I have stopped violence, hatred, and ignorance. You are still running toward them." There was no condemnation, no fear, only eyes filled with boundless compassion, not seeing a monster, but a man still capable of awakening. And in that moment, Angulimala, who had never feared anyone, trembled. He knelt and begged to follow the Buddha. The news shook the kingdom. How could a murderer become a monk? How could someone who had spilled so much blood wear the sacred robe? The public was outraged. They hurled stones at Angulimala, cursed him. But the Buddha did not retreat. He simply said, "If this man has truly transformed at the root, who among us has the right to deny it?" Angulimala offered no defense, no plea for forgiveness. He simply practiced in silence, enduring the contempt of those he once terrified. When struck, he bowed his head. When mocked, he remained quiet, not out of weakness, but because he knew this was his karma to bear and his only path to redemption. And in time, Angulimala attained liberation, becoming an arahant, one who had extinguished all inner fire. The story of Angulimala is not an excuse for wrongdoing. It does not suggest that guilt can be erased easily. Rather, it is a reminder that no matter how deep one has sunk into darkness, if the light reaches them at the right moment, they can awaken. And true compassion is not when we embrace the good, but when we dare to look into the face of evil without hatred, when we reach out to those the world has cast away. Compassion is not weakness. It is strength that transcends right and wrong, light and dark, to recognize the untouched potential within every human being. Today, when we encounter those who have erred, criminals, wrongdoers, or even the shadowy parts of ourselves? Can we stop, as the Buddha did? Or are we still running, chasing anger, judgment, and the need to punish, just as Angulimala once did? That question remains, echoing from the ancient forest into our modern world. Story 2. Amrapali, the courtesan whom a Buddha did not reject. In the ancient city of Vaishali, famed for its grandeur and politics, there lived a woman whose name stirred both fascination and disdain, Amrapali. Her beauty was legendary, her charm unmatched, and her wit sharper than many of the ministers who tried to win her favor. Yet despite her fame, she bore the invisible weight of a title that society never let her forget, courtesan. No matter how admired she was in secret chambers, in public, she was untouchable. A woman celebrated by kings, but condemned by the people. Amrapali was not born into this fate. She was abandoned as a baby beneath a mango tree and raised by a gardener, earning the name Amrapali, meaning sprung from the mango grove. She was bright, graceful, and radiant from a young age, but in a world that prized women for their bodies rather than their minds. Her path was quickly shaped for her. The laws of Vaishali decreed that any woman of supreme beauty must become the royal courtesan, a companion to nobles, forbidden from marriage, and owned by the state. She learned to survive with poise. In her home, philosophers and generals debated over wine. Kings offered fortunes for a night in her presence. But in truth, Amrapali's heart was hollow. She saw the emptiness behind silk robes and golden coins. She was adorned, but unloved, respected for her talents, but never valued for her soul. Then one morning, word spread through Vaishali like wildfire. The Buddha had arrived. The streets buzzed with anticipation. Great merchants and lords scrambled to prepare offerings, hoping the enlightened one would accept their invitations. To be visited by the Buddha was the highest of honors. But to everyone's shock, it was Amrapali who reached him first. She came not with jewels or extravagance, but with humility and reverence. She bowed before him and simply said, "Lord, will you accept my meal at my home tomorrow?" And without hesitation, the Buddha replied, "I will." The city was stunned. The courtesan's house? Why would a holy man enter the home of someone so impure? The nobles were outraged. They tried to tempt him with more lavish feasts, hoping he would rescind his acceptance. But the Buddha did not waver. "A promise given is a path I do not abandon," he said. In Amrapali's simple home, under no grand canopy or golden hall, the Buddha sat and ate in silence. She watched him, not as a man, but as a presence so calm, so undisturbed by desire or judgment, that it broke something open within her. No man had ever looked at her without wanting something. But here was someone who saw her fully and wanted nothing in return. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. After the meal, Amrapali offered her entire estate to the Sangha. The palace she had built with years of performance, wealth, and sacrifice. She gave it away without hesitation. Later, she renounced her role and joined the monastic community. The courtesan became a nun. The woman who had once entertained kings now sat under trees, meditating in silence, walking the path of liberation. Her transformation rippled through history, not because of who she had been, but because of how she was seen. The Buddha did not try to change Amrapali. He simply did not reject her. In a world eager to cast stones, he refused to throw even a glance of judgment. Amrapali's story reminds us that true compassion does not ask, "What have you done?" but rather, "What pain have you carried?" It teaches that the labels society imposes, sinner, outcast, impure, can be dissolved in a single act of unconditional presence. And perhaps the deeper question is this: in our own lives, who do we still reject? Who have we judged before knowing? Whose humanity have we denied because of their past, their choices, or their appearance? If a Buddha can dine with a courtesan, can we not also sit with the parts of ourselves and others that we've tried to exile? In the quiet presence of non-judgment, even the most wounded hearts can find their way home. Story 3. The man no one dared to look at, and the first gaze that changed everything. On the outskirts of bustling Rajagaha, where nobles rode in chariots and merchants haggled over silk and spices, there was a forgotten corner of the city, a place where society's untouchables were banished. These were the people no one wanted to see, let alone speak to. They were barred from temples, forbidden from sharing meals, and often shunned simply for existing. Among them lived a young man named Sunita, a latrine cleaner, waste collector, and street sweeper. The lowest of the low. Sunita didn't protest. He had accepted his place. From birth, he had been told he was unworthy of learning, unworthy of dreams, and certainly unworthy of walking with his head held high. When he walked through the city, he hugged the walls, avoided eye contact, and prayed not to be noticed. If he accidentally brushed against someone, they cursed him, sometimes beat him. His very presence was seen as a stain that should be erased. One day, like any other, Sunita was sweeping human waste from a dusty roadside path leading into Rajagaha. Sweat and stench clung to him as he worked. Suddenly, he noticed a large group approaching. Panic surged in his chest. He knew what would happen if they saw him. So he scrambled to the edge of the road, bowed his head low, and froze, hoping to disappear. But someone in the group stopped. Someone unlike any man Sunita had ever seen. It was the Buddha. Unlike everyone else who had ever laid eyes on Sunita, the Buddha did not turn away. He didn't avert his gaze. He didn't hurry past. Instead, he stopped and looked directly into Sunita's eyes. In that gaze, there was no disgust, no pity, and no contempt. Only stillness, and something Sunita had never received. The full, calm presence of another human being, as if his existence actually mattered. Sunita's heart pounded. His instincts screamed. He stammered, "Lord, I'm not worthy. I am filthy. I cannot hear your teachings. I shouldn't even be standing here." The Buddha said nothing for a long moment. Then he asked, "If you seek the path of liberation, where does impurity lie? In your work? Or in your mind?" Sunita was stunned. No one had ever asked him a question like that. No one had ever spoken to him as if his mind mattered. Right there, in the middle of a dusty road. Beneath the stares of onlookers, some curious, some mocking, the Buddha invited Sunita to become a monk. A man who had never even been allowed near a temple was now being welcomed into the Sangha. The news rocked Rajagaha. Many were outraged. "You teach noble truths," they said to the Buddha, "and yet you accept someone so vile into your order?" The Buddha simply replied, "Sunita attained arahantship, the highest level of enlightenment in the Buddha's path. The man no one dared to look at had become a master of liberation, not through fame or position, but through an awakening that came from within." Sunita's story is no fairy tale. It is a direct challenge to how the world judges human worth. It reminds us that what we call unclean is often just a label forced upon the vulnerable. And sometimes, all it takes to awaken someone's dignity is a gaze that holds no judgment. Have you ever looked at someone as if they didn't deserve to exist? Have you ever felt superior just because of someone's job, background, or skin? If so, remember Sunita. And remember this: a heart bruised by society's rejection can still become a wellspring of purity if it is seen, believed in, and loved without condition. Story 4. The grieving mother who lost her mind, and the awakening that came through impermanence. There was no one in the city of Savatthi who did not know the shadow of that woman, her hair tangled like a bird's nest, her robe tattered and torn, her feet bleeding, and her gaze empty as if her soul had been swept away by a flood long ago. She wandered from alley to square, scratching the dirt with her hands. She had made a long journey alone to give birth, and then calamity struck like a relentless storm. Her husband drowned in a flash flood while trying to build shelter. Days later, unable to distinguish night from day, repeating the same question again and again, "Who will give me back my children? Who will give me back my children?" No one had an answer. Each day, she wandered, searching like a ghost clinging to grief. One morning, when a large crowd had gathered in Jetavana Grove to hear the Buddha speak, Patakara happened to arrive. The people stirred. Some moved to drive her away, but the Buddha raised his hand, motioning for silence. As she approached, her haunted eyes met his gaze. It wasn't a look of fear, nor of pity. It was quiet, deeply knowing, as if it could see through every layer of her suffering. He didn't ask her who she was. He simply said, softly, "You have lost your husband, your children, your family. But you have not lost the Dharma. Only the Dharma cannot be swept away by the world." Patakara froze. For the first time in all those aimless, tormenting years, she felt her feet touch the ground. Something in that voice, no, in that truth, pierced the fog inside her. Everything is impermanent. The Buddha made no promises to return her children. He didn't try to soothe her with comforting illusions. He simply showed her what she needed most, the one truth she had never been taught to face. That loss is not a punishment, but a law of nature. Under the shade of that tree, Patakara sat down. She wept, not with madness, but with quiet, human grief. Then she listened to the Dharma. Then she meditated. Then she learned to live again. Little by little, the woman once deemed insane returned, not to her old life of wealth and safety, but to a new life of clarity and strength. She became a bhikkhuni, a respected monastic. Especially not when what we hold in our hands are the very things most people spend their lives chasing: wealth, fame, power, even love and respect. And yet, throughout the course of history, there have been those standing at the very peak of worldly success who chose to lay it all down, not because they failed, but because they encountered something deeper than success: awakening. What could make a king, ruling over an entire kingdom, step back and embrace a life of simplicity? What could lead the richest, most admired individuals to renounce everything and live as beggars, monks, or simply as seekers on a path back to themselves? No answer makes sense when we look through the eyes of the world. And some truths only reveal themselves when we loosen our grip and finally let go. Story 1. When a king bowed before the homeless sage. He was the sovereign of one of the most powerful kingdoms of ancient India, the mighty Magadha, where armies marched under his command and the wealth of 1,000 villages flowed into his treasury. King Bimbisara had everything a man could dream of: power, prestige, prosperity. And yet, one day, he descended from his golden throne, walked barefoot across the palace grounds, and knelt before a man who owned nothing, wore the simplest robes, and wandered without a home. That man was Siddhartha Gautama, now the Buddha. Their paths had crossed before, many years earlier, when Siddhartha was still a prince and Bimbisara saw in him the glow of someone destined for greatness. The king had offered him a place in his court, riches. Bimbisara, now older and heavier with the burden of rule, felt drawn to seek him once more. But this time, the man before him was not the uncertain prince of yesteryears. He was radiantly still, a being of depth and clarity, whose mere presence silenced the clamoring noise of ambition and fear. In a gesture that astonished his ministers and advisors, Bimbisara bowed, not out of protocol, but from something deeper: recognition. In front of his court, his guards, his people, the king laid down his pride. For the first time, perhaps, he was not a ruler, but a human seeking truth. What followed was not just a moment of reverence, but a transformation. Bimbisara did not abdicate his throne, but he relinquished something more insidious: the illusion that power could bring inner peace. He asked questions, not commands. He listened, not to flatter, but to understand. And when the Buddha spoke, not as a preacher, but as a mirror to his soul, the king began to see the futility of clinging. He sponsored the Sangha, offered land for the first monastery, and supported the Dhamma not as a royal patron, but as a devoted student. Yet even in his devotion, Bimbisara would face the ultimate test of attachment. His own son, Ajatashatru, would betray him, driven by ambition, intoxicated by darker influences. Here, the lesson deepens. The Buddha did not promise immunity from suffering, even to kings. What he offered was understanding, and through it, release. Bimbisara's story is not one of riches lost or power undone. It is the story of a man who learned that true nobility is not measured by birth or throne, but by the courage to bow before wisdom and the strength to let go. Story 2. When power can't command the heart. The journey of King Pasenadi. He was one of the most powerful monarchs of ancient India, King Pasenadi of the Kosala kingdom. The first meeting between Pasenadi and the Buddha was not a royal ceremony. It was a confrontation that startled the king, a man used to reverence and obedience, as he faced someone who neither feared his crown nor flattered his name, the Buddha. But because something deep within him stirred, he knew that all his power could not resolve the disquiet growing inside. He still found himself angered by small things, fearful of what he couldn't control, and hurt by the fickleness of human loyalty. One night, after a bitter argument in the palace, Pasenadi came to see the Buddha. Exhausted, he asked, King Pasenadi became one of the Buddha's most devoted patrons. He funded monasteries, provided food, and protected the Sangha from hostile forces. But his real journey wasn't political, it was personal. There was a time he silently wept as he listened to the Buddha speak on impermanence. He had lost a child. He understood, no one is immune to suffering. One peaceful morning, Pasenadi sat alone in the mango grove where the Buddha once rested. No attendants, no guards, just the wind and the birds. He closed his eyes, breathed slowly, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't a ruling king, but simply a human being listening to himself. From a quick-tempered man, he became more patient. From one filled with doubt, he learned to trust. From one used to commanding, he learned to listen. Not because the Buddha forced him to change, but because the Dhamma, like water, seeped into the cracks of his heart and softened what no sword could touch. Pasenadi never renounced his throne, unlike some others. He continued to rule and hold his position. But his way of ruling transformed. He used less power to impose and more compassion to guide. In his final years, the people of Kosala remembered him as a just and empathetic ruler, a man who once relied on weapons but later led through wisdom. And when he passed away, the Buddha did not speak of his political achievements. He simply said, "One who rules over himself is the greatest ruler of all." Story 3. Anathapindika, the billionaire who bought land with gold for the Buddha. When wealth becomes the seed of wisdom. In the ancient city of Savatthi, nestled along bustling trade routes and gleaming with the prosperity of merchants, there lived a man whose name echoed across kingdoms, Anathapindika. His real name was Sujata. Anathapindika did not hoard wealth for comfort or conquest. To him, riches were tools, to alleviate suffering, to ease the lives of the poor, to serve something greater than himself. And yet, for all his generosity, he had never met anyone like the Buddha. The encounter was almost by accident. While visiting relatives in Rajagaha, Anathapindika heard murmurs of a teacher whose words could calm the stormiest hearts. Curiosity sparked, and that night, yes, at night, against the advice of his hosts, he set out alone to find this man. It said that such was his yearning that as he walked through the dark, the shadows turned into flowers and the fear within him dissolved into light. There, in the quiet of a forest grove, Anathapindika met the Buddha. No jeweled throne, no temple, just a man under the trees, eyes clear as the sky after rain, speaking of the end of suffering. Anathapindika fell to his knees. Something inside him shifted, as if all the wealth, the charity, begged him to stop. But Anathapindika smiled. "You named your price. I offer it gladly." And so the land became known as Jetavana, the grove of Prince Jita, though it was Anathapindika who made it the spiritual heart of an era. There, the Buddha taught for years. There, kings and beggars, scholars and outcasts sat side by side on the same grass to hear the Dhamma. And at the center of it all, usually behind the scenes, was Anathapindika, arranging food, maintaining order, never seeking recognition, always serving. But his journey wasn't just about external service. As the years passed, his understanding deepened. One day, during a sermon, the Buddha turned to him and said, "More than building temples is the act of building virtue within. But your heart, householder, is already a temple." When he fell ill years later, in great pain, Anathapindika requested the venerable Sariputta to visit him. Lying on his bed, trembling, he listened to the Dhamma once more and wept. Not from fear, but from the beauty of truth. His final words were gratitude, for the path, for the suffering that had led him to it, for the chance to give all he had, and find freedom in the giving. His death was not marked by marble or monuments, but in every monastery that traces its roots to Jetavana, in every corner of the world where the Buddha's teachings are whispered, the gold he laid down still shines. Not in coins, but in compassion. Story 4. Javaka, the royal physician who treated the Buddha and Sangha without asking for a single coin. When great talent is not used for glory, but to serve the path of truth. Javaka Akamrabaka, once a name that made nobles across the kingdom of Magadha wait months for an appointment, was also the man often seen kneeling beside a humble wooden alms bowl, quietly offering medicine, dressing wounds, and never asking for a single coin in return. His beginning was far from royal. Javaka was abandoned by his mother just after birth. They named him Javaka, meaning the one who lives. By chance or karma, Javaka was adopted into the royal household by a relative of King Bimbisara. He grew up in privilege. His final test came from his teacher, who instructed him to find a plant in the forest that could not be used medicinally. Days passed, but Javaka returned empty-handed. "Master, I couldn't find a single plant that had no healing use." His teacher smiled. "Then you have completed your training." Returning to Magadha, Javaka's fame spread quickly. He cured wealthy merchants, high-ranking officials, even the king himself. People hailed him as the divine healer of the East, and his fees could have built palaces. But Javaka never chased wealth. Something deeper stirred within him, an intuition that medicine wasn't just for treating the body, but for easing the suffering of the human spirit. Then he heard about the Buddha. When Javaka first met him, he came with the skepticism of a well-educated man. What could a wandering ascetic possibly say that would surpass the science he had learned? But upon hearing the Buddha speak, he was stunned. The Buddha didn't speak in medical terms, yet addressed the very core of human suffering. Illness of the body is natural, but it is the illness of the mind that binds one to endless cycles of pain. From that moment, Javaka became one of the most devoted lay supporters of the Sangha. Though a royal physician, he never accepted a single offering for his services to the monastic community. On the contrary, he built a clinic near Jetavana Monastery, where he frequently visited to tend to the Buddha and the monks. Once, someone asked him, "Why would a man of your stature offer free service to those who have nothing to give in return?" He smiled gently and said, "They've given me the most precious gift, the Dharma. I am merely offering back what little I have." Javaka didn't just heal physical wounds. Over time, he infused every movement with metta, loving-kindness. And in every patient encounter, he treated not just symptoms, but souls. In the end, Javaka wasn't richer than most expected. He didn't leave behind palaces or medical schools bearing his name. But he left something more profound, a legacy of someone who lived amidst fame, wealth, and power, yet laid it all down before something far greater, the truth that liberates. In the chronicles of Buddhist history, Javaka is remembered not just as an extraordinary healer. When ordinary people become enlightened ones, there is a kind of glory the world often fails to recognize. It does not come with medals, it is not celebrated in the media, nor does it bring titles or wealth. It is the glory of inner transformation, when someone seemingly insignificant in the eyes of the world blooms like a lotus from within. During the Buddha's lifetime, many kings, nobles, and wealthy merchants sought his teachings. But there were also those whom society had cast aside, a beggar, a scorned woman. It was often these lowly ones who possessed the deepest hearts. Like parched earth cracked by the sun, their minds became fertile ground where the seeds of the Dharma took root and flourished. These encounters, silent, powerful transformations, are the stories we are about to enter. Story 1. Sujata, the cowherd girl, and the bowl of milk porridge that changed human history. That morning in Uruvela, the sky was cloaked in a soft mist. A gentle breeze swept in from the Naranjara River, carrying a warm bowl of freshly cooked milk porridge. She had no idea that this simple offering would become a pivotal moment in human history, a small act with the power to change the world. Sujata was the daughter of a farming family who raised cattle near the edge of the forest. Her home stood not far from a great ancient tree, one that the local villagers believed was sacred. It seemed her wish had been granted, and this morning, she was returning to give thanks. But as she approached the tree, Sujata didn't find a spirit or deity as she might have imagined. Instead, she saw a man, emaciated, his ribs protruding sharply through his skin, seated cross-legged in deep meditation. At first, she thought he might be a forest spirit in human form. There was something arresting in his presence, not his appearance, which was worn and frail like that of many ascetics, but the strange stillness that surrounded him. Like the river beneath the morning fog, he was quietly, mysteriously there. Without hesitation, she placed the bowl of porridge before him and bowed. Her gesture came from a pure place, not out of charity, not out of fear, but from an intuitive trust that this man was the rightful recipient of her offering. As his body trembled with weakness and his spirit teetered between endurance and collapse, Sujata's bowl of milk porridge appeared like a soft beam of light in his fading consciousness. He accepted it not with greed, but with a profound inner shift. As the warmth of the porridge filled his belly, a deeper realization began to take root, one that transcended food or ritual. It was the truth of balance, not too much austerity, not too much indulgence. The middle way. That moment, so seemingly mundane, was the spark that led to a great awakening. Soon after, Siddhartha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, where he entered deep meditation and ultimately attained enlightenment, becoming the Buddha. Without Sujata's porridge, his body might not have endured long enough. And without that final turning point, prompted by the simple kindness of a cowherd girl, the world may never have known the light of Buddhism. Sujata never knew the full impact of what she had done. She returned to her village and lived a quiet life. But her pure-hearted action continues to echo through the centuries. Her story reminds us of something profound. You don't need to be powerful, wealthy, or scholarly to contribute to the awakening of the world. Sometimes, simplest acts that contain the seeds of awakening. And sometimes, the greatest transformations do not begin with wars, declarations, or revolutions, but with an act of compassion, passed from hand to hand, heart to heart. Story 2. Rohini, the girl no one wanted to touch, who transformed into an enlightened one. The sun blazed harshly over the village of Visali, casting long shadows on its dusty roads. At the very edge of this settlement, in a small, weather-worn house that most avoided, lived a girl named Rohini, a name that was seldom spoken aloud anymore. People in the village had long stopped talking about her, or if they did, it was in whispers of disgust. Rohini suffered from a severe skin disease since childhood. Cracked. Anuruddha, a devoted follower of the Buddha and one of his close disciples. Every time he returned to the village, he would visit her with medicine, food, and occasionally, the words of the Buddha. But this time, he came not just with comfort, but with an invitation. Come with me to the monastery, Anuruddha said gently. There, no one judges you by appearance. There, the subtle hesitations of fellow travelers and her own internal fears. But when she arrived at the monastery where the Buddha was residing, something unexpected happened. No one turned away. The nun smiled at her, offered to carry her things, and treated her like a human being, not more, not less. For the first time in years, Rohini wept. Under the care of the bhikkhunis, nuns, Rohini began a simple yet steady routine, rising at dawn, meditating beneath a small Bodhi tree, listening to the Dhamma, and slowly learning to observe her body and mind without fear or revulsion. Her once trembling fingers now learned to gently touch her own skin without flinching. Every breath, every mindful step, every quiet chant was like peeling back the layers of shame and pain she had carried for so long. One day, during a Dhamma talk, the Buddha spoke of a disease even harder to cure than skin ailments, the sickness of the mind, inflamed by hatred, envy, and fear. His words struck Rohini like lightning. She realized that while the world had rejected her outer form, she had nourished her own suffering with hidden anger and deep self-loathing. That inner poison, more than her physical disease, had kept her trapped. From that moment on, she didn't just seek healing, she practiced it. Every time she swept the meditation hall, offered water at the altar, or sat in quiet contemplation, she wasn't just a sick woman anymore. She was a seeker, a woman walking a path toward freedom. Over time, her body began to heal. The lesions disappeared. The foul smell faded. But what truly caught people's attention wasn't her skin, it was her presence. Rohini now carried a peaceful gaze, a soft smile, and a stillness that comforted those near her. One early morning, meditating beneath a sala tree, Rohini entered a profound state of stillness. In that timeless space, all distinctions between self and others, beauty and ugliness, praise and rejection, melted away. She realized a deep truth, not through study, but through compassion, not through willpower, but through letting go. When her brother Anuruddha learned that Rohini had attained realization, he knelt before her, not because she was his sister, but because she had walked a path that many thought impossible for someone like her. Rohini's story continues to be told within the Sangha, not as a tale of miraculous healing, but as a testament to the power of acceptance, mindfulness, and love. She had once been a shadow that society wished to forget, but from that shadow bloomed a lotus, not because anyone saved her, but because she chose not to abandon herself. Story 3. The mother who carried her child's corpse through the city, a journey through unspeakable grief. In the winding alleyways of ancient Savatthi, amidst the clamor of markets and the laughter of playing children, there was once a figure that made people stop in their tracks. A young woman, frail and hollow-eyed, clutching a lifeless child in her arms. She went from door to door, pleading, "Please, just a little medicine. My boy has only fainted. Please help me wake him." Her name was Kisagatami, and her heart was already shattered. She wasn't rich, educated, or remarkable by worldly standards. She was simply a wife, a mother. Her world, her hopes, the very meaning of her life, were wrapped in that tiny body, her firstborn son, the only light in her difficult life. Then came a sudden fever, a cold wind in the night, and the child never woke again. No one can fully grasp the mind of a mother faced with such a loss. When neighbors gently told her the child was dead, Kisagatami shook her head violently and fled from the truth. She didn't cry in mourning. She didn't prepare a burial. Instead, she held her son tightly, walking the streets, begging strangers for a remedy to bring him back. Each refusal, each pitying gaze, cut deeper into her unraveling sanity. Then someone pointed her to a different kind of healer, not a doctor or apothecary, but a sage. "Go to the monastery," they said. "The Buddha is staying there. He understands suffering like no other. Maybe, just maybe, he can help you." With a flicker of fragile hope, Kisagatami made her way to Jetavana Monastery. The monks watched as she entered, not with fear or disdain, but with a deep, compassionate silence. No one stopped her. They allowed her to approach the Buddha, still cradling her son's lifeless body. Falling to her knees, she begged, "Lord, please, I know you have great power. Please, give me a medicine to heal my child. He is only sleeping." The Buddha looked at her with calm, knowing eyes. He did not deny her request. "I will help you," he said gently. "But first, bring me a handful of mustard seeds. Only a handful, but it must come from a home that has never known death." Kisagatami's face lit up. For the first time in days, she had a task, a purpose, something she could do. She went from house to house, asking not for medicine this time, but for mustard seeds. People were happy to give them. But when she asked, "Has anyone in your household ever died?" the answer was always the same. Yes. A father, a mother, a husband, a child. Death had touched every family, from sunrise to sunset. She knocked on door after door, dozens, hundreds of homes. Gradually, no one had to say more than a look. The eyes of mothers who had lost children, of widows, of orphans, they all told the same silent story. Death spares no one. As dusk fell, Kisagatami sat under a tree at the edge of the city, still holding her child, but this time, her grip had loosened. That night, she did not seek medicine. She simply sat in silence, for the first time facing the mountain of grief that had towered before her. Her child was gone, but in that realization, she saw something else. She was not alone. The next morning, she returned to the monastery. No longer frantic, no longer begging. She laid the child's body down and knelt before the Buddha. "I could not find a single home untouched by death," she whispered. "Now I beg of you, not to save my son, but to teach me how to bear this pain." And the Buddha taught her the truth of impermanence, that all things that arise will pass away, and that clinging to what cannot be kept is the root of suffering. He did not tell her to forget her son, but helped her see. It was precisely because her child had truly lived that her pain was real, but that it didn't have to bind her forever. From that day, Kisagatami stayed at the monastery. No one forced her to ordain, but she chose that path as her way forward. Through months of mindful walking, quiet meditation, sweeping the halls, he quickly drew attention, not just because of his lineage, but because of his poise and sharpness in reciting scriptures. But beneath the polished surface, his face burned red with anger and hurt. He stormed over and confronted them, his voice raised. "Who are you to judge me like this? I gave up a palace, left behind luxury to become a monk. I know the scriptures better, Chant the precepts better. How could you disrespect me? The two monks said nothing. They simply bowed and walked away in silence. But Tissa couldn't let go. Why can't they acknowledge that? The Buddha did not scold him. He didn't argue. He simply asked, Tissa, if someone sweeps dust off a mirror and the dust falls upon themselves, can you see what is dust on the mirror and what is dust within? That one question, so softly spoken, struck Tissa like a thunderclap in his heart. He didn't respond immediately, but his silence was no longer filled with rage. It was the stillness of awakening. All this time, he thought he was practicing, but in truth, he was feeding his ego. He believed he was serving the Dharma, but in reality, he was seeking self-glory. The next morning, people noticed Tissa had woken earlier than usual. He was seen sweeping the temple courtyard with his own hands, something he had never done before. During alms rounds, he asked to accompany elder monks. In study sessions, he sat quietly, taking notes without interrupting or debating. No one told him to change, but everyone saw that he was truly changing. Tissa was no longer the center of attention. No one called him the prodigy or the prince monk anymore. But it was at that very moment that he truly became a monk in spirit. Years later, having attained arahantship, Tissa would recount this story to young novices. He always ended with these words. A single sentence can stir anger or awaken wisdom, depending on whether you use it to build a wall or open a door. And he knew, without a doubt, that thanks to the Buddha's simple question that day, a door within him had opened. Part 4. Resistance and Trials. When the Buddha faced opposition, not everyone bows in reverence. Some sought to harm him, but even they taught us the power of the unshaken mind. Not every soul welcomes the light. Not every heart is ready to receive the truth. On his path of spreading the Dharma, the Buddha did not only encounter seekers of wisdom or those yearning for awakening. He stood firm, calm, unwavering, and deeply compassionate. And in time, many of those who once hated him would become living proof of the transformative power of an awakened mind. If you believe enlightenment is a serene path lined only with lotus flowers, these stories may challenge that view. For sometimes, it is the enemy that becomes the final test of true compassion. Devdatta, a royal prince of noble birth, remarkable talent, and commanding presence, was expected to shine brightly within the royal court of Magadha. Born into the Sakya clan, a close cousin of Prince Siddhartha, Devdatta had it all: status, intelligence, and striking good looks. From early childhood, the two were raised together, studying under renowned teachers, and were often seen as parallel stars in the firmament of the dynasty. But Devdatta could never have predicted that his cousin would abandon the throne to become a renunciant, and in doing so, change the spiritual course of history. When Siddhartha became the Buddha, the radiance of his awakening shook the foundations of India's ancient belief systems. People flocked to hear his teachings. From wealthy merchants to beggars, from princes to paupers, all were drawn to the wisdom of a man who had once been a prince, but now wore the humble robes of a monk. Walking barefoot in search of alms, Devdatta, long accustomed to reverence within the royal family, began to feel overshadowed. Devdatta began to harbor a daring idea. Why shouldn't he lead the Sangha? He, who had political ties, royal blood, and spiritual attainments, rather than one who had renounced the world? One day, Devdatta approached the Buddha with a bold proposition to hand over leadership of the Sangha to him. The Buddha gently, but firmly, refused. From that moment on, Devdatta's heart turned, rolled a boulder down a cliff in an attempt to crush him, and even unleashed a drunken elephant into the streets, hoping it would trample the Buddha during his alms round. And yet, in every instance, he tried to split the Sangha, drawing hundreds of young monks to his side by proposing an extreme code of discipline. He preached harsh austerity, banned reliance on lay supporters, dims the light of wisdom. He had every quality needed to become a saint, but chose instead the path of rivalry, simply because he could not accept being surpassed by another, even if that person was his own kin. And within this story, we see another facet of the Buddha, not only awakened, but immovable in the face of danger and betrayal. Never once did he show anger or retaliation, only compassion, always compassion. His silence in the face of violence was not weakness. It was the strength of a mind anchored beyond the turbulence of the world. Story 2. The Corpse in the Night, a sinister plot to tarnish the Buddha. During the years the Buddha walked his path of teaching, not everyone bowed in reverence. In ancient India, a society undergoing profound transformation, the appearance of a spiritual teacher who rejected rituals, who questioned dogma, and who gained immense respect without seeking power or titles, created discomfort among many, especially for established religious sects and their high priests, who had long enjoyed social status and royal favor. The rise of a serene monk with a begging bowl was deeply unsettling. Among those most threatened was a sect devoted to fire rituals. Their influence relied heavily on elaborate ceremonies and keeping followers in a state of awe and fear. To them, the Buddha wasn't just another teacher. He was a threat to their entire structure of control. But they couldn't confront him directly. His teachings were too solid. He never insulted anyone, never debated to win. He taught with compassion and silence. Yet it was precisely this silence that unnerved them. They could not provoke it, nor corrupt it. So, they turned to something darker. They would not argue, they would scheme. A cruel plot was devised. They approached a young courtesan named Sundari, known for her beauty and bold spirit. They paid her handsomely and gave her a role to play. Each evening, she would stroll near the monastery where the Buddha and his monks resided, acting flirtatious, dropping suggestive words, laughing within earshot of the gates. The insinuation was clear. She was involved with the monks, perhaps even with the Buddha himself. No one saw anything definitive. But rumors don't need proof to grow. Weeks passed. One night, Sundari vanished. Days later, her body was found hidden in a grove near the monastery. And then the accusations exploded. The very sect that had orchestrated the plan took to the streets, screaming outrage. A woman has been violated and murdered to protect the secret sins of these so-called holy men. Whispers turned to shouts. Suspicion spread like wildfire. Supporters of the Buddha became confused. Doubt began to gnaw at the minds of the faithful. Some distanced themselves. The atmosphere around the monastery thickened with tension and shame. But the Buddha remained silent. He did not rush to defend himself. He did not host a public rebuttal or demand an investigation. He simply said to his disciples, "We will not respond to lies with anger. Keep your body, speech, and mind pure. The wind cannot shake a mountain. Yet truth, though slow, cannot stay buried forever." Not long after, a drunk man, caught in a moment of loose tongue, revealed the entire plot. He was the one paid to kill Sundari and conceal her body. Others were named. Witnesses confirmed the scheme. The sect's deception unraveled in full daylight. Public opinion shifted swiftly. People came to the monastery in tears, kneeling before the Buddha, asking for forgiveness, not for crimes committed, but for ever having doubted his integrity. The Buddha did not scold them. He only said gently, "To have doubted, and now to see clearly, that is the beginning of wisdom." This story, preserved in ancient texts, is more than an account of resilience in the face of defamation. It is a powerful lesson in stillness. In life, there will be moments when we are wrongly accused, misunderstood, or even attacked for things we never did. Our instinct is often to retaliate, to justify, to prove our innocence. But sometimes, truth needs silence to bloom. And sometimes, the greatest strength lies in keeping one's peace. Story 3. A farmer's anger, and the master who didn't react. The Buddha's path was never lined entirely with lotus flowers. Though he was once a prince, revered by kings and commoners alike, the day he exchanged his royal garments for the humble saffron robe, he stepped into a life filled not just with reverence, but with resistance. And sometimes, that resistance came not from scheming nobles or rival sages, but from ordinary people, burdened by the weight of daily toil and bound by their own limited understanding of the world. In a small village in northern India, where fields stretched toward the horizon and mango trees cast soft shadows in the morning sun, lived a farmer named Jadala. He was strong, hardworking, and deeply proud of the fruits of his labor. To him, nothing in life came without sweat, and he believed that monks, those wandering ascetics who begged for food, were nothing but freeloaders living off others' efforts. One crisp morning, as dew still clung to the earth, the Buddha walked into the village with a small group of disciples. His steps were light, his presence gentle, and in his hand, Something within him flared up. He dropped his plow, stormed toward the Buddha, and shouted, "Who are you to come begging here? I work from dawn to dusk for every grain of rice. And you just wander around waiting for others' kindness. What kind of life is that? Where's the fairness?" The Buddha said nothing. He stood there, calm and serene, eyes soft with compassion, as if no insult had just been hurled his way. The silence infuriated Jadala further. "Don't you have anything to say? Or do you think you're too holy to respond to a man who actually works?" Then, the Buddha spoke, his voice gentle and unwavering. "If someone brings a gift to another, but the gift is not accepted, to whom does the gift belong?" Puzzled, Jadala replied sharply, "Well, it still belongs to the person who brought it." The Buddha nodded. "Likewise, if you offer me your anger, but I do not accept it, it remains with you." The words dropped into Jadala's heart like a pebble into still water, not shattering the surface, but sending ripples far and wide. He stood there in silence. No one had ever responded to him like that. Not with sharpness, not with resistance, but with a calmness that was strangely disarming. Jadala turned back to his plow, but something within him had shifted. All day, he couldn't forget the monk's eyes, not condemning, not fearful, simply present. A few days later, curiosity got the better of him. The Buddha looked at him and said, "Anger is like holding a burning coal with the intent to throw it at someone. You are the one who gets burned first." From then on, Jadala began visiting often, not out of suspicion, but out of a quiet yearning to understand. He remained a farmer, still working his land with pride. He didn't become a monk, but something inside him had changed. He listened more, to others, and to himself. This story is not dramatic. There are no miracles, no divine interventions. And yet, it demonstrates a powerful force, the strength of a mind undisturbed by insult, the wisdom that rises above reflex. And perhaps most striking of all, it shows how a single peaceful smile can cool the fire raging in someone else's heart. Story 4. The Empty Vessel. Why Insults Cannot Wound a Hollow Mind. Throughout his journey of teaching and awakening, the Buddha encountered the full spectrum of human emotions, ranging from profound reverence to the most scathing insults. And yet, he rarely responded with long sermons or verbal retaliation. Often, his answer came in the form of a simple image, a quiet remark, or just sheer, immovable silence. One such story has traveled through centuries, the story of the empty vessel. It began in a bustling town in the kingdom of Magadha, a place where scholars, merchants, and wanderers often gathered. One day, the Buddha and his monks passed through the town on their alms round. This so-called enlightened one was merely a smooth talker, detached from the harshness of real life. Determined to expose the Buddha, Barka stormed forward. He didn't bow. He didn't greet. He simply stood before the Buddha and unleashed a torrent of insults. "You sit here doing nothing, and the world calls you awakened? You abandoned your family and live off the food of others. What is there to respect in that? Your words are just pretty illusions for the gullible." The disciples nearby, though well-practiced in compassion, couldn't help but feel a flicker of indignation. Some looked ready to intervene, but the Buddha gently raised his hand, inviting silence. "Let him speak," his gesture seemed to say. Barka ranted on for several more minutes, his voice rising, his eyes ablaze. But the Buddha, he remained still. He did not speak. He did not flinch. His presence was as calm and unmoving as a mountain beneath the storm. Eventually, but with a tone as steady as a stream, "Tell me," he asked, "if someone offers a gift to another person, but that person does not accept it, who does the gift belong to?" Barka blinked, confused, and replied, "Well, if the other doesn't accept it, the gift still belongs to the giver." The Buddha smiled softly. "Then the words you've offered, I do not accept. They still belong to you." But like a man gently revealing a truth, most believe the way to protect themselves from insult is to fight back. But when the heart is empty, free from ego, free from the need to grasp at praise or recoil from blame, no insult can take root. He motioned toward a clay water vessel beside him, the kind monks often use to store drinking water. "See this jar? If it holds nothing, then whatever is poured in simply flows out. But if it's already full of filth, even a few drops more will cause it to overflow and spread its contents." Not eager to convert, but curious, open, Sometimes he would sit near a temple or under a tree, letting the wind pass over him, watching his own thoughts settle like dust. That sometimes the highest form of wisdom lies in being empty. For when you do not let others' arrows pierce you, you're not the victor. You are simply untouched. And in a world full of noise and flame, that is the greatest strength of all. Part 5. The Buddha and his great disciples. Encounters that shaped Buddhist history. Those who met him and became radiant lights spreading across the world. On his sacred journey, the Buddha left behind more than teachings. He left behind people. Among the thousands who encountered him, some meetings seemed random, yet they became turning points in the flow of spiritual history. They came from all walks of life: princes, ascetics, courtesans, the impoverished, the fallen. What they shared was not their background, but their transformation upon touching wisdom. They didn't just change themselves. They became great beacons who carried the Dharma far and wide, sowing seeds for Buddhist traditions we still inherit today. To leave behind their homes, comforts, and reputations, and set out together in search of ultimate truth. Their path led them first to the ascetic master Sanjaya, whose teachings were known across the land. For a time, they practiced his rigorous disciplines with sincere devotion. Yet despite their efforts, they soon realized the path he offered lacked the clarity and fulfillment they sought. The mind was still clouded, the heart still unsettled. Once again, they left, determined to keep seeking, no matter how long it would take. Then one day, as Upatissa wandered through the bustling marketplace of Rajagaha, he saw a young monk walking silently on his alms round. There was something about the way the monk moved, calm, centered, radiant without arrogance. His name was Assaji, one of the Buddha's earliest disciples. Upatissa approached him with reverence and asked to hear a teaching. Assaji replied humbly, "I am only a new disciple, not skilled in explanation. But this is what I have understood. All things arise from causes. When those causes cease, the things also cease. This is the teaching of the great sage." That was all. But in that moment, something extraordinary happened within Upatissa. The words struck like lightning through the fog of his mind. Questions that had haunted him for years dissolved. He felt a profound stillness take hold of his heart. He knew, without doubt, that he had found the path. He rushed to tell Kalita, who, upon hearing those same words, experienced the same awakening. Without hesitation, they both set out to find the teacher of Assaji, the Buddha. When they finally met the Buddha, they were overcome. Without asking for miracles, without hesitation, they requested to become monks. The Buddha accepted them into the Sangha. From that day, they were given new names, Sariputta and Moggallana, two of the greatest pillars of early Buddhism. Sariputta became renowned as the foremost in wisdom. His insight was deep, his logic razor-sharp, his ability to explain the Dhamma unmatched. He was called the Buddha's general, the master of right understanding. Yet, despite his brilliance, he remained deeply humble, always respectful of even the newest novices, always learning. Moggallana, his lifelong friend. But he never used these abilities for personal gain. His supernatural gifts were always in service of compassion, helping the lost, the suffering, and the spiritually blind. What made them extraordinary was not just their individual strengths, but their unity. Sariputta's analytic clarity was balanced by Moggallana's mystical vision. One dissected truth with precision. The other felt it with boundless sensitivity. They were like two wings of a great bird, each completing the other. They had once promised, if one reached liberation before the other, they became legendary teachers, not just in knowledge, but in character. Their companionship was a beacon for all monks and seekers, proof that the spiritual path need not be a lonely one. Together, they walked the way to freedom, lifting countless others with them. Their story is a timeless reminder that liberation may begin in the quietest of moments, a chance encounter in a marketplace, a few simple words heard at the right time. For those lost in a maze of philosophies, theories, and inner confusion, the journey of Sariputta and Moggallana offers hope. That wisdom and awakening are real, and sometimes it only takes one spark to set the soul ablaze. Story 2. The Heart That Remembered Everything. Ananda, guardian of the Buddha's words. In the vast forests near the city of Vaisali, where ancient winds whispered through mango groves and monsoon rains turned the earth to gold. A young man quietly walked beside one of the most revered figures in history. His name was Ananda. He was not known for superhuman wisdom like Sariputta, nor did he possess the miraculous abilities of Moggallana. And yet, in the hearts of many, Ananda was the most beloved of all the Buddha's disciples. For one reason, he loved, but with a quiet reverence born of deep affection. He would wake before dawn to prepare water for washing. He would shield the Buddha from the midday sun, absorbing everything. But Ananda's gift was not just loyalty. It was memory. In an age before writing, where teachings were carried by the breath of the listener, Ananda's mind became the living library of the Dhamma. It is said that he remembered every word the Buddha ever spoke. And yet, even more precious than his memory was his compassion. Though the Buddha at first hesitated, it was Ananda's gentle persistence, his argument that women too were capable of awakening, that opened the Sangha to all. He saw the suffering of queens, servants, and mothers. He did not see gender. He saw the human heart. His tenderness was not weakness, but strength in a different form. Where others mastered doctrine, it was Ananda who stayed close, asking the questions no one dared to ask. On the night of the Buddha's passing, under the twin sala trees in Kushinagar, Ananda wept, not as a student who had lost a teacher, but as a son mourning the fading of a great light. The Buddha looked upon him with tenderness and said, "Do not grieve, Ananda. You have done well. Be diligent. You will soon be free." But Ananda had not yet attained enlightenment. Despite years of study, countless discourses, and deep personal experience, he still carried the subtle threads of attachment. It would not be until shortly before the first council, when the teachings were to be preserved for future generations, that Ananda, feeling the weight of responsibility, finally let go. That night, in solitude, he sat and crossed the river of sorrow. He became an arahant. At the first council, when the great disciples gathered to recite the Buddha's words, it was Ananda who stood and began, "Thus have I heard," with those simple words. He channeled decades of remembrance into a living oral tradition, one that would survive wars, kingdoms, translations, and centuries. Without Ananda, there would be no Sutta Pitaka, no preserved teachings, no stories of the Buddha's meetings with kings, outcasts, wanderers, and seekers. Ananda didn't just remember the words. He remembered the tone, the mood, the context. He transmitted not just teachings, but humanity. His life is a powerful reminder that not all greatness lies in brilliance or power. Sometimes, the most transformative force is the one who stays quietly beside us, bearing witness with love, holding space with care, and remembering what others forget. Ananda was not the brightest star in the sky, but he was the one who held the sky together. Story 3. She walked barefoot across the dust, the woman who asked to become a monk. In the ancient city of Kapilavastu, when the morning mist still lingered over the palace gardens and jasmine leaves trembled in the breeze, a woman stood before a child not born of her womb, yet raised with love greater than a mother's. Her name was Mahapajapati Gautami, the sister of Queen Maya, and the one who stepped in to raise Siddhartha after his birth mother passed away. She had bathed him as an infant, watched over him during sleepless nights, and seen his gaze, even as a child, stretch beyond palace walls, as though hearing a truth hidden beyond this world. When Siddhartha left the palace to seek the end of suffering, Gautami felt both the ache of loss and the rising of something deeper, a sense that his path, though painful, was necessary. Years passed. The boy she once cradled had become the Buddha, a beacon of liberation, followed by kings and commoners alike. His teachings spread across the Ganges plain like monsoon winds, filling the hearts of thousands with clarity and calm. But amidst this sea of male disciples, no women were ordained. They could listen, they could serve, but they could not walk the path fully, as monks did. Gautami, now in her aging years, felt that longing awaken within her. It was not a desire for status or power. It was a fire that came from deep understanding, that the path to freedom should not be divided by gender. So, she did what no woman had done before. She asked. She approached the Buddha and said, "Please, let women enter the Sangha. Let us too walk the path to liberation." But the Buddha, despite his compassion, declined. 3 times she asked. 3 times he said no. And then, she did something extraordinary. Along with 500 other women, most of them former queens and noble women, Gautami cut her hair, donned robes, and began walking, barefoot, across rocky roads and blistering heat. From Kapilavastu to Visali, over mountains, through forests, across rivers. Their feet bled. Their faces were lined not with makeup, but with dust and resolve. When they arrived at the monastery where the Buddha was staying, their robes were worn, their bodies tired, but their eyes shone with unwavering purpose. It was Ananda, the Buddha's closest attendant, who saw them first. Moved by their devotion, he pleaded with the Buddha on their behalf. "These women," he said, "are not ordinary. They have left everything. Can they not also reach awakening?" The Buddha, seeing their sincerity, relented, but not without setting conditions. He allowed the establishment of the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the order of nuns. But he imposed the 8 Garudamas, strict rules that placed nuns beneath monks in hierarchy, even if the nuns were senior in years or wisdom. It was a complicated triumph. On one hand, the conditions showed the resistance and limitations of the time. Still, the gates were open. Gautami would go on to become a fully awakened arahant. Her spiritual achievements were immense. But perhaps more significant was her symbolism, a woman who refused to be left behind, who walked for days not just for herself, but for generations of women to come. She became a voice not of rebellion, but of dignified courage, a force that demanded inclusion not through anger, but through relentless love. She taught others. She led the Bhikkhuni Sangha. She stood tall, even in silence. And centuries later, when the history of Buddhism is written and rewritten, her name still echoes, not as a shadow behind the Buddha, but as a pillar beside him. Her journey reminds us, the path to liberation is not owned. It is walked. And sometimes, it is a woman's bare feet that leave the deepest prints. Story 4. The boy left behind, and the path he walked to his father's truth. In the royal palace of Kapilavastu, amidst the fragrance of sandalwood and the hush of silken robes brushing polished stone, a boy was born under a shadow, not of scandal, but of absence. His name was Rahula. The son of Prince Siddhartha and Princess Yasodhara, Rahula entered the world not with celebration, but silence. Siddhartha's departure into the night left a void, and in that void, Rahula grew. He was raised in the lap of privilege, but with an emptiness that wealth could not fill. The questions came early. Where is my father? Why did he leave? Was I not enough? These were not the tantrums of a prince. They were the quiet wounds of a child born to a man who had chosen truth over family. Years passed. The reunion was not one of embraces. It was distant, ceremonial. Yet, something stirred in young Rahula. He saw not the father he had imagined, but a figure of calm, one who carried no regrets. Yet no pride either. Yasodhara, wise and graceful, told her son, "If you seek truth, ask him for your inheritance." So Rahula approached the Buddha and said, "Father, give me my inheritance." The Buddha looked into his eyes and replied, "Then follow me." And just like that, Rahula left the palace, not with chariots or fanfare, but barefoot and in robes. He became a novice monk under his father's guidance, the youngest in the Sangha. His training was unlike that of other monks. While others sought the truth in forests or sermons, Rahula's path was intimate. It was the path of unlearning expectations, dismantling resentment, and rebuilding trust not just in his father, but in life itself. The Buddha taught him through silence. Rahula would go on to become an arahant, fully awakened. But more than his spiritual achievement, it was his emotional transformation that stood as a testament. He had every reason to be bitter, to reject the man who left him. Yet, he chose to follow, not blindly, but bravely. Their relationship, once marked by separation, became a rare story of reconciliation, not through sentimentality, but through shared silence, discipline, and truth. In Rahula, we see a different face of discipleship. Not the thunder of Mahakasyapa, not the brilliance of Sariputta, not the devotion of Ananda, but the quiet courage of a son who walked behind his father's footsteps, not to belong, but to understand. And in the end, he did. Part 6, The Final Encounters. Light before departure. The Buddha's final moments, and the timeless messages he left behind. Some encounters don't last long, yet shine eternally like stars that never fade. Some words are not elaborate, yet carry the weight of an entire life, or perhaps many lifetimes. And there are moments that seem like an ending, but in truth, they mark a beginning. This is not a chapter of triumphs, not of miracles or radiant enlightenment witnessed by the multitudes. This is the quiet chapter, where the greatest teacher of all time takes gentle steps toward the twilight of his earthly journey. And yet, within that stillness, the light in his words and in the hearts of those around him suddenly glows ever more brightly. Have you ever wondered, what would an enlightened being say? Knowing their time in this world is near, what would they leave behind? Whom would they choose to meet? And what would their gaze reveal? Come, step into the final stretch of this path, where, in each encounter, each word, each footstep, something timeless seems to awaken. Story 1. Sujata, the final stranger, and the last door opened. Evening descended slowly over the sal grove. Sunlight filtered gently through the ancient trees, casting soft shadows on the earth below. Around the Buddha, a quiet circle of disciples gathered, their faces solemn with understanding. The end was near, and yet, amidst this sacred stillness, there remained one more encounter, a meeting that was not planned, but destined. Sujata was not one of the Buddha's known followers. He was a wandering ascetic, a seeker of truths, a man of debate and pride. For years, he had questioned the paths taught by various teachers, dissatisfied with vague promises and incomplete answers. And now, hearing that the Buddha was in his final hours, a stirring arose within him, not curiosity, but an urgent sense that this was his last chance to uncover something real, something final. He journeyed to Kusinara, approached the guarded gate where disciples were keeping vigil, and asked to be let in. They refused him gently. The Blessed One is very ill. He must rest. But Sujata did not plead or protest. He simply stood there, quietly, with the determination of a traveler who knows he is at the door of home. Inside, the Buddha opened his eyes and said with calm clarity, "Let him come." And so began a final meeting, a quiet exchange between one who had walked the world in search of truth and one who had already found it. Sujata sat down, his heart still layered with skepticism. "Lord," he asked, "is it true that only your path leads to liberation? Are there no other teachers? No other ways?" It was not a question of arrogance, but a cry from a soul exhausted by wandering. The Buddha did not answer with argument or doctrine. He spoke of the noble eightfold path, of virtue, meditation, and wisdom. He said that wherever this path is found, there too is the end of suffering. He made no claim of exclusivity, no boast of supremacy, only a clear pointing toward the truth itself. And something within Sujata shifted. In that quiet grove, surrounded by those who were preparing for goodbye, he found his beginning. He asked to be ordained that very night. And the Buddha, though frail in body, accepted him. Sujata became the final monk, the last to be admitted into the Sangha before the Buddha's passing. At the moment when the outer light was dimming, an inner light was lit. The story of Sujata may not hold dramatic weight in the annals of history, but spiritually, it speaks volumes. It tells us that liberation is not reserved for the long devoted, not exclusive to those born close to the teachings. It can arrive even in the final hour, to anyone who sincerely yearns, who truly listens. The Buddha did not end his life surrounded by grand rituals or proclamations. He closed the chapter with a simple act of compassion, one last conversation, one final act of inclusion. Even in his dying hours, he remained the teacher. The gate was never closed. And so, Sujata, the final one to be awakened, stands as a quiet yet powerful reminder. It is never too late. Until the final breath, there is always time to return, to awaken, to step onto the path that leads beyond suffering. Story 2. The final assembly in Kusinara, the Buddha's last teachings to the Sangha. Night had settled over Kusinara with an eerie softness. The stars above glimmered like silent witnesses to a moment that would soon be etched into the soul of the world. Inside the quiet sal grove, where the twin sal trees stood in full bloom out of season, as if nature herself bowed in reverence, the Blessed One lay on his right side, serene and still, in the lion's posture of final rest. Word had spread quickly that the Buddha's passing was imminent. From nearby regions, monks hurried on foot, some running breathlessly through forests and fields, others walking in solemn silence. They came not only to bid farewell, but to receive what might be the last glimpse, the final teachings, the closing thread of a life that had illuminated their paths. By the time they arrived, the grove had transformed into a sanctuary of profound stillness. There was no wailing, no ritual chants. Instead, there was a sacred hush, the kind that comes not from fear or despair, but from a deep knowing that something eternal was present in this fleeting moment. Ananda, the devoted attendant who had walked beside the Buddha for decades, welcomed the arriving monks. His eyes were red with restrained grief, yet his posture remained calm, reflecting the same clarity his master had taught him to uphold. The monks sat in respectful rows around the reclining figure of the Buddha, waiting, listening, and preparing their hearts. Then, gently, the Blessed One opened his eyes. His voice was faint but unwavering, carrying the weight of 1,000 truths in each word. He addressed them not with sentimentality, but with strength and purpose. "Monks," he said, "the Dhamma and the Vinaya I have taught you. These shall be your teacher when I am gone." In that single sentence, he relinquished all need for personal authority and placed the living truth of the teaching at the center. It was not him they were to follow, but the path he had illuminated. The gathering listened intently as he spoke of the impermanence of all conditioned things. "Be islands unto yourselves," he reminded them. "Be your own refuge. Take the Dhamma as your lamp. All things that arise, pass away. Strive diligently for your liberation." These were not simply words of parting, but a direct transmission of the essence of the journey he had spent his life mapping. And yet, even in this final assembly, there was space for honesty and vulnerability. Ananda, overwhelmed by emotion, stepped forward and confessed his sorrow. He feared that with the Buddha's passing, the Sangha would fall into darkness. His voice cracked as he spoke, but the Buddha looked at him not with pity, but with profound compassion. "You have served me well, Ananda," he said, "with kindness and care, not for gain or reward." Then he turned to the monks and declared that Ananda, despite not yet being an arahant, was worthy of the highest respect. His heart was pure, and his presence a blessing. The Buddha then asked 3 times if anyone had doubts or unresolved questions about the Dhamma. Silence followed each time, not from fear or hesitance, but from a collective clarity. The teachings had been complete, the path had been laid out in full. There was nothing more to add, nothing more to clarify. The truth had been given without distortion. This final meeting in Kusinara was not a farewell, but a handover. The torch had been passed from the master to the community. No thunder rolled, no divine hand descended, only the stillness of awakened presence. The Buddha did not leave behind relics or doctrines to be worshipped blindly, but a living path, one that required effort, mindfulness, and personal insight. That night, under the trees heavy with fragrant blossoms, the Sangha sat together in deep meditation. Some reflected on the teachings. Others sat with tears silently falling, and still others experienced great awakenings, as though the presence of the Tathagata, even in the final hours, had opened doors within their hearts they had never known were there. This last gathering was more than a historical event. It was a transmission beyond words, the kind that travels not through pages but through presence. In the heart of Kusinara, in the quiet circle of disciples who had walked the dusty roads of India to find truth, the Buddha's legacy became not a memory, but a seed, planted deeply in the soil of human consciousness. And it is that seed, of awareness, of discipline, of courage, that continues to bloom, even today. Story 3. Be a light unto yourself. The final teaching of an awakened one. In the heart of the Sala Grove in Kusinara, where the trees bloomed out of season as if to bid farewell, time seemed to stand still. In that sacred moment, as the human body of the Buddha neared the end of its 80-year journey on this earth, his final words were neither lamentations nor regrets. They came instead as a quiet thunderclap, simple yet powerful. Be a light unto yourself. No other statement could encapsulate the essence of the Buddha's path more fully. No dependence, no divine savior, no blind worship. This was not merely a farewell. It was a transmission, a parting message that did not close a life, but opened a path. In Eastern traditions, it is common for spiritual masters to pass on a secret mantra or appoint a successor before they depart. But the Buddha was different. He left no chosen heir, no sacred relic to rule over the Sangha. He left behind only one directive: be a light unto yourself. In the original Pali, Atta Deepa Viharatha, Atta Sarana, which means, abide in yourself. Take yourself as your refuge. Could there be a clearer compass for those lost in the storms of life? The light the Buddha spoke of is not some external flame. It is the inner clarity, wisdom, mindfulness, and compassion that already exists within each being. For more than 40 years, the Buddha had never claimed to save anyone. He was merely a guide, a finger pointing at the moon. Whether one walks the path or not, it was always left to each individual. Even in his final moments, as life slowly withdrew from his frame, he remained consistent. No one can walk the path for you. No God, no guru. Only you, with the light you kindle from within. To some, those words might have sounded like abandonment. After all, the spiritual path is often lonely. But looked at more deeply, they are a profound gift. It is the highest form of trust a teacher can give to a student. You are enough. You are capable. You don't need to follow me. You need to find your own light. He did not tell you to shine the light on him. He told you to shine it within yourself. He did not say follow in his footsteps. He said follow the truth, the eternal, unchanging law of reality that anyone can see, if only they learn to observe deeply. This final teaching is also a bold rejection of cults of personality. The Buddha never sought worshippers. He sought practitioners. He left behind no golden statues, no mystical scriptures, no magical incantations. Only a simple path, the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. And in that simplicity lies the most radical revolution. Centuries later, as Buddhism spread from India across Asia and into the West, those words remained a compass for countless seekers. In Zen temples covered in snow, in silent meditation halls in California, in bustling monasteries of Tibet, people still whisper those final words like a call in the dark. Be a light unto yourself. And perhaps the most wondrous thing is this: those words never grow old. In an era flooded with information and confusion, where people desperately seek leaders and systems to follow, that single sentence becomes more relevant than ever. As the world grows more dependent on institutions, ideologies, and idols, Buddha, 2,600 years ago, had already pointed out, the true light does not come from outside. The real lamp must be lit from within. No one can hand it to you. No one can hold it for you. No one can walk the path for you. Final part. Have we ever met the Buddha? There are encounters that change the course of a life. A glance, a few words, or even a moment of silence can sometimes open an entirely new doorway in someone's journey. Throughout his life, the Buddha met countless people. They came from every corner of society: murderers, nobles, courtesans, kings, farmers, merchants, and even skeptics. Each person brought with them a question, a wound, or an unfinished chapter. And somehow, in meeting him, whether in a brief exchange or a long journey, their lives were transformed. But are these just ancient tales of the past? Is it possible that we, living in the 21st century, amid the noise of cities and the restlessness of modern minds, have also, in some form, met the Buddha without even realizing it? Perhaps the Buddha comes not with the title Buddha. Perhaps he appears in the form of a stranger, a difficult moment, or even in the deepest silence when we finally face ourselves. Let us continue, then, to the final step of this journey, where the real question is not, where was the Buddha, but, are we quiet enough to recognize him when he appears? The stranger who woke you up at the depth of despair, could that be the Buddha? There are encounters that last no more than a few minutes, leave no name, and never happen again, yet they turn the course of our entire life. At first glance, these moments seem like coincidences, but looking back, we often realize they were like teachings. A casual remark that lands precisely when we are hanging off the edge. A gaze that pierces through the web of our self-deception. An unexpected presence appearing right when we thought we were entirely swallowed by darkness. Evelyn Scott, a successful British businesswoman, once had such a moment. She stood at the railing on the 17th floor of a luxury hotel in Tokyo, ready to end it all. After a series of collapses, her company bankrupt, her husband unfaithful, her only child not speaking to her for 2 years, Evelyn saw herself as a complete failure, with nothing left worth living for. At the peak of her despair, a voice spoke softly behind her. If you jump, the pain won't end. It will only be passed on to someone else. She turned, startled. It was a middle-aged Japanese man, simply dressed, nothing outwardly remarkable. But his eyes were both gentle and commanding, like those of a father. She didn't jump. Later, when she returned to thank him, after the hotel staff had taken her inside, the man was nowhere to be found. No one knew who he was, and no camera had recorded his appearance. Evelyn would later say that night was the beginning of her spiritual journey. She started reading about Buddhism, practicing meditation, and gradually found her way back to herself. Now, we forget we even hold a lamp, until someone passes by and quietly helps us light it again. What do we call such a person? A bodhisattva? An angel? Or simply a human being who, in that moment, embodied the mind of the Buddha? Perhaps we may never meet the historical Buddha in the flesh. But maybe, just maybe, we've already met manifestations of him in the form of ordinary people. They didn't preach. They had no mystical powers. But their presence, in one singular moment, awakened something in us that years of philosophy or reasoning could not, a direct seeing. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, better than 100 years lived in ignorance is one day lived in seeing the Dharma. And sometimes, the Dharma isn't found in temples or books. It's hidden within a fleeting moment we never expected to be sacred. Benjamin, a former American soldier who served in Afghanistan, once shared that he survived the war but did not survive the trauma. He became an alcoholic, easily enraged, unable to sleep. One night, while wandering the streets with a bottle of whiskey in hand, a boy of about 6 or 7 bumped into him. The child looked up at Benjamin, then softly said, trembling, "Mister, please don't be sad. I want to give you this." The boy handed him a small, heart-shaped plastic stone, a cheap toy he had clearly cherished. Then he ran off, too quickly for Benjamin to ask his name. That little stone still sits in Benjamin's pocket to this day. After that night, he sought help, entered rehab, joined a meditation program for veterans, and later became a guide for others who had been to similar dark places. He never found out who the boy was. But when he tells the story, Benjamin always tears up and says, "That was the Buddha. I believe it was, even if no one else does." Such encounters are brief, yet they often lodge deep within us and become the turning point of our lives. What's mysterious is that these people tend to appear exactly when we need them, not too soon, not too late. They don't try to teach us anything, but their presence feels like an answer. And when we think back on those who once woke us up, perhaps we'll recognize a certain light in them, not blinding like the sun, but warm like a candle. A light that doesn't save us, but guides us, doesn't act for us, but stirs us, doesn't command, but gently reminds. If the Buddha is awakening, then any action that awakens another is a reflection of the Buddha. And if we can offer someone a look, a word, a touch, just at the right time, when they are standing at the edge, then we, too, are part of that encounter. Perhaps the Buddha never left. We've just forgotten how to recognize him. Why every one of them is you. The untold fragments within us. When we look at the people in the stories told, Subhata, confused at the edge of life, Ananda, aching with sorrow for not having awakened, a soldier wandering in the panic of war, or a mother in tears under the gaze of a child she doesn't know, we might think of them as distant, unfamiliar, unrelated to our own lives. But if we sit still for a while, letting the stories settle like gentle rain on our shoulders, something begins to stir. A strange familiarity, a quiet truth. Each of them, in some way, is us. Yet unaware, too busy chasing something brighter, something more spectacular, only to wake up in the moment of separation. In our lives, we've been the one in pain, the angry one, the hopeless one, the one who gave up. And sometimes, we've been the stranger who unknowingly walked past someone else's moment of despair, not realizing that we were the spark that changed everything. The people in these stories are not just mythical. They are not just names from scriptures or dramatic figures in moving tales. They are living symbols of the emotional states we all know: fear, longing, jealousy, compassion, awakening. Evelyn, the woman standing on the edge of a rooftop in Tokyo, is the suffocated dream, the unseen loneliness. Benjamin, the soldier clutching a plastic heart-shaped stone, is the wound of war, the inner child within us still crying. And the anonymous Japanese man, the unnamed little boy, perhaps they are the very light we've hidden inside ourselves all along. The Buddha once said, "No one can save another, but anyone can be the cause for another to save themselves." That teaching holds a quiet truth. We are both the ones being awakened, and the ones awakening others, sometimes in a single lifetime, sometimes in a single moment. A Western Zen master once said, "The goal of practice is not to become someone new, but to remove what hides the person you already are." That means every time we resonate with someone in a story, it's not because they are so different, but because they've touched a part of ourselves we haven't fully seen or have long forgotten. In these stories, sometimes we are the seeker, sometimes the denier, sometimes the one who wounds, then the one who is wounded. The cycle never places anyone fully on one side. There are no pure heroes or villains, only people trying, struggling, searching for freedom from their own chains. Seen this way, something in us softens. We become less quick to judge, less eager to blame those still trapped in their pain. Because we understand, we've been there too. And maybe, tomorrow, we will be there again, with this understanding. But to see that His light is still here, hidden within the tiniest corners of ourselves, shining through every person we meet, and glowing in every chance we are given to become someone else's light. Ultimately, the spiritual path is not about chasing perfection. It is about returning, recognizing the pieces within us we've rejected, denied, or forgotten. Because only when we see ourselves in everyone, and everyone in ourselves, do we begin to grasp what the Buddha truly wanted to reveal, that liberation is not elsewhere. It is here. In the very moment we stop dividing the world into me and them. We build statues, offer flowers, burn incense, and perform rituals, acts filled with reverence, but sometimes forget the core message He left behind. Do not worship me. I am merely a guide. Turn inward. It is there, within your own heart, in mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion, that the path to liberation lies. There's a story of a young disciple, not yet 20, who once asked the Buddha with sincere innocence, "Master, when you are gone, where should I go? Who should I trust?" The Buddha simply replied, "Be an island unto yourself. Let the Dharma be your lamp. Do not walk in darkness." That was not a doctrinal proclamation. It was a liberation, a call to awaken. The Buddha never intended to create a religion, nor did he wish to be the center of blind worship. What he offered was understanding, that each person could see for themselves the nature of suffering, impermanence, and emptiness, and from that insight, find freedom. Yet history has a habit of deifying the most humble of humans. And over 2,000 years, the Buddha was not spared. From India to Tibet, Thailand to Vietnam, Japan to Europe, wherever Buddhism took root, thousands of statues of the Buddha emerged, carved in gold, in stone, in sacred wood. His face calm and compassionate, eyes half closed, hands in symbolic mudras. These sacred icons remind us of something beyond the ordinary. But if we stop there, if we only venerate, we risk missing what truly matters. Imagine you're lost in a dense forest. Someone has walked that path before you and left clear footprints behind. You could follow those footprints, step by step, and eventually find your way out into the light. But instead, you kneel down at the footprints, bow deeply, and pray. Will you ever get out of the forest? The Buddha left us those footprints in the form of teachings, precepts, and a life lived in awakened presence. But he did not want us to kneel. He wanted us to walk. And walking that path does not mean rejecting rituals or scorning tradition. Honoring the Buddha is a beautiful gesture, a reminder of the noble qualities we can cultivate within ourselves. But ultimately, reverence must be accompanied by practice and by honest questions. How am I living? Am I aware of others' pain? Have I stopped to listen to my own breath? Jack, an American of Jewish background, once shared a memory from his first Vipassana retreat in India. "I came here because I wanted to know if it was possible to live without running away from myself." Jack would later become one of the founders of Spirit Rock Meditation Center and a key figure in bringing Buddhist practice to the West. For him, the Buddha was not a deity, but a companion on the path, someone who went ahead and left a light for others to follow. And you too can see the Buddha that way, not as a distant god. That means you can do it too, not by becoming a saint, but by becoming yourself, fully awake. From century to century, those who truly found the Buddha were not the ones who chanted the most or bowed the deepest, but those who dared to stop, to look inward, to face their fears, to sit with the silence that no one else wanted to touch. And there, in that stillness, they discovered something astonishingly simple. The Buddha was never far. The Buddha was speaking through their own breath, listening through their own heart, pointing the way from the very heart of this human life. Can you hear it? The journey to awakening begins with a meeting. Perhaps today, within you, there are fleeting moments in life, no more than a passing breeze, that somehow change the entire direction of a human life. They don't have to be dramatic encounters, don't need shining lights or divine visions. Sometimes it's just a look, a sentence, or a quiet realization born from deep suffering. That's enough to stop you in your tracks, turn you inward, and make you realize, maybe I've been asleep for too long. A meeting with the Buddha doesn't always come in the form of a master, a monk, or an ancient statue. It could be a stranger on the street who says one sentence while you're in chaos. It might be a child holding you while you're mourning. It could be a loved one long gone, appearing in a dream just to whisper, "Don't be afraid anymore." And sometimes, used to think enlightenment was a distant thing, reserved for monks on mountaintops. Until one night, in the ER, she watched an elderly patient on the verge of death, not afraid, not angry. And in that moment, something met her. Not the man, but something deep inside her. That night, she began to meditate. She began to ask the questions she had always avoided. And a journey began. Leon, a former corporate lawyer from France, fell into depression after a brutal divorce and losing custody of his daughter. One night, ready to end his life, he sat on a park bench. On that bench, someone had left an old, worn book, a collection of the Buddha's sayings. Leon didn't read the whole thing. He stopped at a single line. No one saves us but ourselves. We must walk the path alone. He wept, not because of the words, but because something inside him finally woke up. And in that instant, a meeting took place. We often believe that awakening requires something big, a thunderbolt, a life-shattering event, a renunciation of all things to enter a monastery. But the truth is, the seed of awakening has always been inside you. All it needs is a spark, a moment of presence, to begin growing. And that meeting? It could be, right now, as you read these words, as you wonder, am I lost too? Have I been blindly chasing something, forgetting who I really am? Maybe you're hurting. Maybe you feel empty. But that very pain, that very emptiness, might be the gateway. Awakening isn't a destination. It's not a title. It's not some metaphysical state. Awakening is seeing clearly, right in the middle of confusion. It's hearing the truth, even in silence. It's no longer searching for the Buddha outside, but recognizing the voice of awareness rising within. The encounter with the Buddha might be external, but more often, it's internal. A meeting where you finally realize, the Buddha never left. The Buddha was never far. He was simply waiting for you to stop, turn inward, and listen. And you know what? This meeting isn't necessarily a once-in-a-lifetime event. It can happen again, and again, each time you're ready. Each time you soften. Each time you let go and choose to be real. Have you ever had a moment that woke you up, an encounter that changed your direction, a word that shook your soul? Share it with us in the comments. Your story might be the spark for someone else's awakening. And if you feel that this journey speaks to something inside you, take a few moments now. Sit in stillness. Ask yourself, what is it within me that's longing to be heard? Perhaps that's the very meeting you've been waiting for all your life. There are encounters that last only a moment, yet have the power to redirect an entire life. Not through miracles, nor through lofty speeches, but with a single look free of judgment. A single phrase that reaches the deepest, quietest place within. Such encounters have happened, not only changing the fates of those involved, but echoing across more than 2,000 years. At the center of these meetings was one man, not a king, not a warrior, not a conqueror wielding power, but someone who walked silently through the world with a heart full of boundless compassion. The Buddha, not one who founded a religion to be worshipped, but one who simply pointed the way for others to return to their truest selves. What's remarkable is that those who encountered him weren't sages or saints. They were ordinary people, and often deeply broken. A ruthless killer, a courtesan living beneath the weight of social scorn, a grieving mother driven mad by loss,